This microchip can take up to 26 weeks to make.
First, the silicon dioxide in the sand has to be converted into pure.
If you cannot innovate, you will not survive in this industry.
I have to be honest. As an American, I believe in our power to lead, to innovate, to inspire. But what I'm seeing now? It's shocking. We're not acting like a confident superpower. We're acting like one that's scared to lose. The US isn't just trying to compete with China. It's going out of its way to cripple China. Not by out-innovating them, not by outworking them, but by shutting off their access to the future, by choking the lifeblood of modern tech, chips.
Microchips or semiconductors are incredibly important technologies. They are in things from refrigerators all the way to cars and the smartphones we use on a daily basis.
This isn't just a tech war, it's a full-blown effort to stall a rival's rise. And we're calling it strategy. For decades, we've championed free trade. Reagan called America the shining city on a hill. Clinton promised open markets would lift all boats. Obama, Bush, Biden, they all praised capitalism as the engine of peace and prosperity. We told the world, compete on merit, and the best will rise. But now, a real competitor steps up, and suddenly we're banning chips, blacklisting companies, pressuring allies to block sales. We're rewriting the rules of the very game we invented. This isn't defending freedom. It's economic fear dressed as patriotism. Because deep down, we know the truth. If China wins the chip race, it doesn't just win semiconductors, it becomes the nucleus of global innovation. And that scares us. It terrifies us. Because if we're not number one, what are we? This isn't new. We've seen this playbook before. Remember Japan in the 80s? They got too good, too fast. They weren't just making better cars, they were making better everything. More efficient factories, smaller, more powerful semiconductors, smarter business models. At one point, they held nearly 50% of the global semiconductor market. The US panicked. What did we do? We didn't step up our game. We signed the Plaza Accord in 1985, pressuring Japan to artificially inflate the yen. That made their exports more expensive overnight. Then came the trade restrictions, the tariffs, the diplomatic pressure. All of it designed to slow them down. It worked. Too well. Japan's economy went from boom to bust, a powerhouse, flattened. Welcome to the lost decade, a 30-year hangover from a single moment of American insecurity. And now, rewind back to today. What does this feel like? Exactly. The US is doing it again. Only this time, it's China. And instead of cars, it's chips. Instead of Walkmans and Toyotas, it's AI clusters, quantum computing, 5G networks. This time, the stakes are global and the target is the future. The pattern is clear. When America fears losing its edge, it reaches for the brakes. Not to steer better, but to make sure no one else passes us on the track. By 2035, China is projected to surpass the US in GDP. But it's more than just numbers. China is creating parallel systems of power. They're aligning with BRICS nations, supporting Russia against US interests, launching new payment systems and testing a BRICS-backed currency designed to compete with the US dollar. Tariffs don't work like they used to. The US can't isolate China the way it could other rivals. That's what makes this different and dangerous. This isn't about semiconductors for fun. Chips are the spine of the modern world. They power everything from smartphones and data centers to AI models, electric vehicles, drones, satellites, and smart weapons. According to the Semiconductor Industry Association, 57% of 2023 global chip sales came from computers and communication gadgets. Add automation, vehicles, and healthcare tech, and you've mapped the battlefield of the 21st century. Here's what's at stake. If China builds cutting-edge chips, they don't just lead in semiconductors. They lead in AI, in robotics, in EVs, in defense systems. They dominate the industries that will decide who shapes the future. China is building fast. They're dominating global chip production, exporting 395,872 shipments of telecommunication devices using chips. They're investing in AI, automation, and edge tech. And instead of competing, the US is slamming every red button marked panic. Restricting AI chips, banning high-performance semiconductors, strong-arming allies like Japan and the Netherlands to block China from buying advanced equipment. The US has pressured TSMC, Samsung, ASML, and Japanese chip firms to restrict sales of chip-making equipment to China, cutting off their access to critical technologies like EUV lithography. This move isn't a slowdown, it's a wall. And it means that China could lag behind Taiwan, South Korea, and the US by years in chip innovation. Meanwhile, companies like Nvidia are being restricted from selling to one of their biggest markets. If these bans continue, China may soon struggle to build anything requiring advanced chips, from electric cars to defense systems. Let's call it out. This isn't about national security. It's about control. The US is fine with China being the world's factory, producing parts, assembling devices, and keeping wages low. That's a China we can manage. A China that stays in its lane. But a China that innovates, that builds its own chips, its own AI models, its own EV platforms, that scares us because it's a China that can't be controlled. A China that doesn't need approval. The US doesn't want to share leadership. It wants to define China's role. And anything beyond low-cost manufacturer? That's too much independence for comfort. There's a brutal irony here. We want the products, the cheap labor, the non-stop production, but we don't want the progress. We want China to make our phones, but not to design their own. We're okay with factories, not R&D labs. Okay with labor, not leadership. And when that starts to shift, the playbook flips from trade partner to threat. What we really fear is a China that no longer needs us, because that's a China that can compete on equal footing. And in a so-called free market, that's the one thing we're apparently not prepared for. And guess what? China isn't backing down. In fact, the restrictions have lit a fire under Beijing's long-term strategy. They've launched Big Fund 3, $47.5 billion to build a fully self-reliant semiconductor industry. That's $7.5 billion more than what the US put into its own CHIPS Act. They're not asking for permission. They're building power. Companies like SMIC are expanding chip manufacturing capacity at lightning speed. SMEE is racing to replicate advanced lithography. AMEC is developing chip etching capabilities to rival the best in the West. And they're not stopping there. Tech giants like Huawei are designing homegrown chips. AI pioneers like DeepSeek are competing with Western models like GPT and doing it fast. China isn't just reacting, it's building an entire ecosystem: fabs, software, training, infrastructure, and innovation hubs. The whole pipeline. If the goal was to stop China's rise, we may have accidentally accelerated it. This isn't containment, it's ignition. But here's the kicker. This fight isn't just hurting China, it's hurting us. Nvidia's market share in China has plunged from 95% to less than 50%. Their sales have dropped dramatically, costing billions in lost revenue. That's not a footnote. That's a crater in the world's most important AI company. ASML, same story. Deals frozen, markets pulled back. The Netherlands may have complied with US pressure, but Dutch companies are now staring at contracts evaporating overnight. What happens when your biggest customer becomes your biggest exclusion zone? And China? They're not taking it quietly. They've slapped counter tariffs on US goods, restricted exports of rare earths like gallium and germanium, and tightened control on critical minerals essential for chip manufacturing and defense systems. They're also doubling down on BRICS partnerships, not just diplomatically, but financially. They're fast-tracking the development of a BRICS-backed currency aimed at undermining the global dollar system. The more the US tries to isolate, the more China fortifies its alternatives. This isn't Cold War 2.0. It's worse. Because this time, it's not just weapons or ideology, it's the infrastructure of the future that's on the line. The US-China rivalry? This is just the first act. The curtain hasn't even risen on what's next. Trump is already teasing a return. If he gets back in office, will he double down? Will he unleash a second wave of tariffs, bigger, bolder, more brutal? Will he go beyond bans and start demanding that US allies impose their own restrictions on Chinese goods? What if Europe doesn't want to follow? What if Africa and Latin America see more opportunity in siding with Beijing? The global chessboard is shifting. The question is, are we making strategic moves or just slamming pieces in panic? And there's more. Will China retaliate by limiting even more rare earth exports? Will it expand its military alliances? Will it offer its BRICS currency as an alternative to the dollar in oil trades, tech licensing, global finance? What happens when the next generation of AI isn't born in California, but in Shanghai? Suspense isn't just for movies, it's real, and we're living in it. This isn't a Cold War. It's a tech-fueled arms race with economic warfare at its core. The question now is, how far are we willing to go? And how much are we willing to lose? Look, I'm not here waving a Chinese flag. I'm waving the white flag of common sense. If the US really wanted to lead, it would invest in its people, in STEM, in education, in domestic fabs, in partnerships that build, not break. We'd double down on public R&D, on international cooperation, on building things that matter instead of burning bridges. We'd be mentoring the next generation of engineers, not blacklisting companies. We'd be inspiring a wave of scientific discovery, not punishing competition with legal red tape. You don't win by making the other guy lose. You win by being undeniable, by setting the standard so high that no one questions your place at the top. You don't get there by blocking access. You get there by unlocking your own potential. Because if America really was the leader it claims to be, it wouldn't be this afraid of someone else catching up. Leadership isn't about fear. It's about vision, courage, a willingness to embrace the future, not manipulate the present. The truth? The US doesn't want to compete. It wants to cripple. And that strategy? It's not sustainable. Not for our economy, not for our global influence, not for the generations coming up who are watching how we treat our rivals and our responsibilities. And the world is watching, closely, patiently, quietly, keeping score.